My male boss fired me after I won an industry award, saying I was too ambitious. 1 week later he regretted. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I sat in the conference room, staring at my boss of 3 years across the polished mahogany table. His face was an unreadable mask, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like heat waves on a summer afternoon. Just 24 hours earlier, I had stood on stage accepting the prestigious Young Innovators Award at the annual marketing summit, a moment that should have marked the pinnacle of my career thus far. "You're too ambitious," he finally said, his voice carrying an edge that made my stomach churn. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with implications I couldn't quite grasp. "This company isn't equipped to handle someone like you anymore." I blinked, trying to process what he was saying. My fingers instinctively wrapped around the award sitting on the table beside me, the very trophy that had apparently sealed my fate. The irony wasn't lost on me. For months, this same man had been encouraging me to apply for industry recognition, praising my innovative campaigns and groundbreaking strategies. Now, those very achievements were being used against me. As I gathered my belongings later that day, memories flooded back of how I'd started at this company fresh out of college. Back then, I was eager to prove myself, willing to take on any challenge thrown my way. I remembered late nights spent perfecting presentations, early mornings catching up on global marketing trends, and countless weekends dedicated to brainstorming sessions that would eventually revolutionize our department's approach to digital campaigns. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments when self-doubt crept in, when colleagues dismissed my ideas as too risky or unconventional. But through it all, there was always one constant: my boss's apparent support. He would often say, "We need more people like you here," during performance reviews. Those words had become my mantra, pushing me to reach higher and work harder. Now, standing in the elevator as it descended to the lobby for the last time, I clutched the award tightly against my chest. The cold metal felt foreign in my hands, a bitter reminder of how quickly things can change. Outside, the city bustled with its usual chaos, oblivious to the turmoil brewing inside me. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, I realized this wasn't just about losing a job, it was about losing faith in the system I believed in the mentorship I'd trusted, and perhaps most painfully, in the person I thought my boss was. The days following my unexpected dismissal passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Each morning, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, searching for answers in eyes that still held traces of shock and disbelief. The apartment that once felt like a sanctuary now seemed suffocating, every corner reminding me of the dreams I had built while working for the company. The framed certificates on my wall, the neatly organized notebooks filled with campaign ideas, even the ergonomic chair I had purchased after pulling countless all-nighters, everything served as painful reminders of what I had lost. Social media became both a curse and a necessary evil. Notifications poured in from colleagues and industry peers congratulating me on the award, completely unaware of the dramatic turn my career had taken. Each message felt like salt on an open wound, forcing me to craft carefully worded responses that neither confirmed nor denied my employment status. Friends called daily, their voices filled with equal parts outrage and concern, but their well-meaning advice only amplified my anxiety about the future. What troubled me most was the gnawing sense of betrayal. During team meetings, my boss had praised my groundbreaking approach to social media strategy. He had personally recommended me for high-profile client accounts and celebrated each successful campaign as if it were his own victory. The memory of him patting my shoulder after our biggest account win last quarter replayed in my mind, accompanied by his words, "You're exactly the kind of leader this company needs." How could someone who had invested so much in my growth suddenly view that same ambition as a threat? Sleep became elusive, replaced by endless nights spent scrolling through job postings and analyzing what had gone wrong. Had I pushed too hard? Spoken too freely about my aspirations? Or was it simply that success, when achieved, looked different from success when promised? These questions swirled in my mind, creating a perfect storm of self-doubt and anger. Yet beneath these turbulent emotions lay a surprising foundation of resolve. With each passing day, I found myself spending less time mourning the loss of my position and more time considering what truly mattered in my professional life. The kitchen table became my command center, covered with lists and notes about what I wanted for my next opportunity. Not just another job, but a place where ambition wouldn't be viewed as a liability. Where innovation would be celebrated rather than feared. Where leadership meant nurturing talent rather than stifling it. These thoughts crystallized into something unexpected, a vision for something new, something entirely my own. Meanwhile, the industry continued to recognize my achievement. Invitations to speak at conferences arrived daily, along with requests for interviews from trade publications. Each opportunity presented a choice: retreat into silence or step forward and claim the narrative. The old me might have hesitated, but the new me saw these moments as chances to redefine not just my career, but perhaps the very culture that had led to my dismissal. In the quiet moments between phone calls and emails, I began sketching out ideas that had long been buried under corporate bureaucracy. Concepts that had once been deemed too risky or not aligned with company values now flowed freely onto paper. The pain of rejection was transforming into something powerful, a determination to create a space where ambition wasn't just tolerated, but cultivated. The news of my departure rippled through the office like a shockwave, leaving confusion and apprehension in its wake. Sarah, my closest colleague, approached my empty desk the next morning, her eyes scanning the neat stack of pending projects I had left behind. She hesitated before opening the shared drive, finding detailed notes and instructions for each ongoing campaign meticulously documented. It was unlike anything they had faced before, a key player removed from the chessboard without warning, yet having anticipated every possible move. In the boardroom, senior management convened an emergency meeting. The atmosphere was tense as they discussed how to redistribute my responsibilities. Marketing Director Thompson suggested dividing my workload among 3 team members, but even as he spoke, everyone knew it was an impossible task. The complex algorithms I had developed for targeted advertising campaigns, the intricate network of international contacts I had cultivated over years, these weren't skills that could be easily transferred or replicated. The first major impact came 2 days later during a crucial client presentation. Without my presence, the team stumbled through explanations of the innovative strategies I had devised. The client, accustomed to my confident delivery and deep understanding of market trends, grew visibly frustrated. By the end of the meeting, they requested a follow-up within 48 hours, a deadline that sent panic through the department. Account managers who had previously relied on my guidance found themselves overwhelmed. Junior staff members, who had learned under my mentorship, suddenly lacked direction. The efficient workflow I had established began to unravel, revealing underlying weaknesses in the team's structure. Meetings that I had streamlined now dragged on without my moderating influence, decisions took longer to finalize without my decisive input, and creative sessions lacked the spark of innovation I had consistently brought to the table. Most telling was the reaction from clients whose accounts I had personally managed. Several reached out directly to human resources, expressing concern about the sudden change in leadership. One longtime partner, impressed by the articles about my award and subsequent public appearances, even offered to help facilitate my return. Their confidence in my abilities seemed to grow stronger with each passing day, making the company's decision appear increasingly questionable. Back in the office, whispers circulated about the circumstances surrounding my departure. Some colleagues expressed admiration for my grace under pressure, recalling how I had maintained professionalism throughout my tenure, even when challenged by outdated practices or resistant team members. Others speculated about the timing of my firing, particularly in light of the national attention my award had generated. The coincidence seemed too stark to ignore. As the week progressed, the reality of my absence became undeniable. Projects stalled, deadlines slipped, and the department's overall performance began to decline. Even those who had initially questioned my methods now found themselves missing the structured approach and strategic foresight I had provided. The very ambition that had been cited as grounds for my dismissal was now glaringly absent, leaving a void that no amount of collective effort seemed able to fill. On the 7th day after my departure, my former boss found himself alone in his office, staring at quarterly projections that painted a grim picture of declining performance metrics. The numbers didn't lie. Since my exit, client retention rates had dropped by 15%, new business acquisitions had slowed to a crawl, and employee morale was at an all-time low. He leaned back in his leather chair, the weight of recent events pressing heavily upon his shoulders. His assistant had just delivered the latest client feedback report, and the comments were devastatingly consistent. Major accounts were threatening to withdraw their business unless changes were implemented immediately. Several prominent industry figures had publicly questioned the company's decision-making, citing my abrupt termination as evidence of backward thinking in a rapidly evolving market. Worst of all, internal surveys revealed that talented employees were beginning to look elsewhere, fearing their own ambitions might be similarly punished. Glancing at his calendar, he noticed multiple entries blocked out for damage control meetings with key stakeholders. The PR team had been working overtime to manage the fallout from media coverage that portrayed the company as resistant to innovation and hostile to young talent. His own peers and executive management were growing increasingly concerned, questioning whether the decision to let me go had been too hasty and potentially catastrophic for the company's future growth. The silence of his office was broken by the soft ping of an incoming email notification. It was from a headhunter, casually mentioning how several top-tier firms were actively seeking individuals with my skill set and vision. The message ended with a subtle suggestion that the company might want to consider reversing its position before competitors capitalized on the situation. This final piece of information settled heavily in his mind, crystallizing the magnitude of the mistake he had made. He rose from his chair and moved to the window, watching employees below scurrying between meetings. Many carried the burden of additional responsibilities they hadn't asked for, their faces reflecting the stress of trying to maintain standards without proper leadership. The realization hit him with full force. In removing what he had perceived as a threat to his authority, he had actually eliminated the very element that had kept the department thriving and competitive. The empty chair in the corner of his office, once occupied by me during strategy sessions, seemed to mock him now. It represented not just my physical absence, but the void left by a mindset that had driven innovation and progress within the company. Every success we had celebrated in recent years had borne my fingerprints, though he had been too blind to see it until now. The ambition he had condemned was precisely what had kept the company relevant in an increasingly aggressive marketplace. As he reviewed the documentation from my last performance review, the glowing remarks about my contributions seemed to leap off the page with renewed significance. The cutting-edge campaigns I had spearheaded, the international partnerships I had forged, the revenue increases I had generated, all these achievements now appeared in stark contrast to the current state of affairs. The irony wasn't lost on him. In trying to preserve the status quo, he had inadvertently jeopardized everything he had worked to build. The knock on his door startled him from his thoughts. It was Sarah, the team lead who had taken over many of my responsibilities. Her expression was one of controlled frustration as she entered, carrying a folder thick with unresolved issues and missed opportunities. "We need to talk about some immediate concerns," she began, but her voice faltered as she noticed the defeated look on his face. In that moment, the full weight of his decision pressed down upon him, and he knew that rectifying this mistake would require more than just a simple apology or reversal of policy. In the days that followed, news of my departure and the subsequent challenges faced by the company spread beyond internal circles, capturing the attention of industry leaders and media outlets alike. Marketing experts began analyzing the situation, drawing parallels between my case and similar occurrences in other organizations where innovation had been stifled by traditional management approaches. Podcast hosts dedicated entire episodes to discussing the dangers of suppressing ambition within corporate structures, using my story as a prime example of how short-sighted leadership decisions could impact organizational growth. Professional networks buzzed with conversations about workplace culture and the treatment of high-performing employees. LinkedIn posts from former colleagues and industry connections garnered thousands of reactions, with many sharing their own experiences of facing resistance to progressive ideas. Influential business analysts published opinion pieces examining the broader implications of punishing ambition in rapidly evolving industries. The narrative shifted from being about a single individual's experience to a larger discussion about systemic issues within corporate America. Meanwhile, speaking invitations continued to pour in from various platforms and conferences. Each request came with an increased level of interest, as organizers recognized the timeliness and relevance of my story to their audiences. Industry publications featured in-depth interviews exploring not just my achievements, but also the cultural shifts needed to support innovative thinking in traditional environments. The initial shock of my termination transformed into a catalyst for meaningful dialogue about leadership, ambition, and organizational evolution. As I navigated this newfound attention, I found myself documenting insights and observations that had accumulated during my career. The notes evolved from personal reflections into structured thoughts about building supportive environments for creative professionals. Late nights spent processing my experience gave birth to concepts that would eventually form the foundation of something greater, ideas that addressed the very gaps in corporate culture that had led to my dismissal. The transformation extended beyond professional circles into my personal development. Family members who had initially worried about my sudden unemployment began recognizing the silver lining in the situation. Conversations with mentors revealed how common such experiences were among successful entrepreneurs and industry leaders. Rather than viewing my firing as a setback, they encouraged me to see it as a redirection towards something more aligned with my true potential. The emotional weight of betrayal gradually gave way to a sense of purpose, fueled by the realization that my experience could serve as a blueprint for others navigating similar challenges. Through networking events and professional gatherings, I connected with others who had faced comparable situations. These interactions revealed patterns and commonalities in how organizations responded to innovation and ambition. The stories shared during these encounters added depth and context to my understanding of workplace dynamics, further shaping the vision that was beginning to take form in my mind. What had started as a personal crisis was morphing into a movement, one that could potentially reshape how companies approach talent management and innovation cultivation. The turning point came unexpectedly during a panel discussion at a major industry conference. Seated among seasoned executives and thought leaders, I found myself articulating not just my personal story, but a comprehensive framework for fostering innovation within traditional corporate structures. The audience's response was electric. Phones lit up with notes, pens scratched furiously against paper, and heads nodded in agreement as I outlined solutions to common barriers faced by ambitious professionals. It was in that moment, surrounded by hundreds of industry peers, that I realized my experience wasn't just a cautionary tale, but a catalyst for meaningful change. Back at the company, the ripple effects of my departure continued to intensify. Clients who had once praised the organization's innovative approach were now questioning its commitment to progress. The marketing department struggled to maintain consistency across campaigns, with multiple teams attempting to replicate my strategic vision without the benefit of unified leadership. Former colleagues, inspired by my public discussions about workplace culture, began approaching management with suggestions for improvement, only to encounter resistance similar to what I had faced. The company's attempts to address the situation internally proved inadequate. A hastily organized committee formed to modernize operations found itself bogged down by bureaucratic processes and conflicting interests. Senior management, aware of the growing disconnect between their traditional approach and market demands, initiated training programs aimed at fostering innovation. However, without genuine commitment or structural changes, these efforts merely scratched the surface of deeper cultural issues. Industry analysts watched with keen interest as competitors began poaching talent from the company, attracted by the publicity surrounding my case and the implied promise of more progressive work environments. Recruitment agencies reported increased inquiries from employees seeking positions where ambition and creativity were valued rather than penalized. The company's reputation, once sterling in the realm of marketing innovation, now faced scrutiny from prospective partners and investors concerned about leadership's ability to adapt to changing market dynamics. Meanwhile, my former boss grappled with the consequences of his decision on multiple fronts. Board meetings became increasingly tense as stakeholders demanded explanations for declining performance metrics and eroding market position. Public statements attempting to downplay the impact of my departure were met with skepticism from industry observers who had followed the unfolding drama. The very qualities he had criticized, my ambition, drive, and innovative spirit, were now being heralded as essential traits for success in the modern business landscape. As weeks turned into months, the gap between the company's traditional approach and the industry's evolving needs widened. Competitors who had studied my work and incorporated similar strategies into their operations began gaining market share. The irony was palpable. The very ambition that had been deemed threatening was now proving to be exactly what the market demanded. The company's struggle to adapt without embracing similar progressive thinking highlighted the fundamental flaw in their decision-making process. The situation reached a critical juncture when a major client, one I had personally secured and nurtured, announced their intention to terminate their contract. Their reasoning was straightforward. In today's fast-paced market, they needed a partner who could match their own ambition and drive for innovation. The loss of this account triggered a chain reaction, with other clients reconsidering their relationships and questioning whether the company could truly deliver on its promises of cutting-edge marketing solutions. Industry publications seized upon these developments, publishing comparative analyses of companies that embraced innovation versus those that resisted change. Articles explored how leadership attitudes toward ambition and creativity directly impacted organizational success, using my case as a primary example. The narrative had shifted from a personal story of professional setback to a case study in corporate evolution, with experts weighing in on the long-term implications of suppressing talent in favor of maintaining traditional power structures. During this period of transformation, I found myself increasingly drawn to the idea of creating something that could fundamentally change the way organizations approach talent management and innovation. The sketches and notes scattered across my kitchen table began to coalesce into a concrete vision, a platform that would bridge the gap between ambitious professionals and forward-thinking organizations. Each interaction with industry peers, every conversation with colleagues facing similar challenges, and all the data collected from observing the company's struggles contributed to refining this concept. The framework took shape gradually, born from countless hours of research and reflection. It wasn't just about providing a service, it was about establishing a new paradigm for professional development and organizational growth. The platform would combine elements of mentorship, peer networking, and institutional support, creating an ecosystem where ambition could thrive without fear of repercussion. Key features emerged from my experiences: transparent communication channels, clear pathways for innovation implementation, and mechanisms for recognizing and rewarding creative thinking. Technical aspects of the platform required careful consideration. I envisioned a sophisticated algorithm that could match professionals with organizations based on shared values and growth potential, rather than just skill sets or immediate needs. The system would incorporate tools for tracking innovation metrics, measuring impact, and providing real-time feedback loops between employees and leadership. Most importantly, it would include safeguards against the very issues that had led to my dismissal, mechanisms to ensure that ambition was nurtured rather than punished. Financial planning became another crucial component of the vision. Initial estimates suggested significant upfront investment would be necessary to develop the technology infrastructure and establish partnerships with industry leaders. Funding options ranged from traditional venture capital to innovative crowdfunding models that would allow users themselves to invest in the platform's success. Each financial scenario was meticulously analyzed, with contingency plans developed for potential challenges and opportunities. Perhaps the most challenging aspect was designing the cultural framework that would underpin the entire system. This involved creating protocols for conflict resolution, establishing guidelines for healthy competition among innovators, and developing training modules for organizations transitioning to more progressive management styles. The cultural component needed to address not just the technical aspects of fostering innovation, but also the emotional and psychological factors that influenced how ambition was perceived and rewarded in professional settings. As the vision solidified, practical considerations emerged alongside idealistic goals. Legal frameworks had to be established to protect intellectual property rights while encouraging collaboration. Ethical guidelines needed to be crafted to ensure fairness in opportunity distribution and prevent the very power dynamics that had led to my situation. Operational logistics required detailed planning, from user interface design to customer support systems, each element informed by the lessons learned from my experience and the subsequent industry reactions. The scope of the project expanded beyond what I had initially imagined, encompassing not just a solution to my personal challenge but addressing systemic issues across multiple industries. Market research indicated strong demand for such a platform, with both professionals and organizations expressing interest in participating. However, the path forward remained uncertain, requiring careful navigation of complex relationships, technological challenges, and societal expectations about workplace dynamics. My former boss's realization of his mistake manifested in increasingly visible ways. He began attending industry conferences where I was scheduled to speak, sitting anonymously in the back rows, taking meticulous notes during presentations that referenced my work. His presence at these events became almost a regular occurrence, though he never approached me directly. Instead, he focused on engaging with other attendees, asking pointed questions about innovation strategies and talent management approaches. The change in his demeanor was noticeable to those who knew him. The once confident executive now carried an air of uncertainty, his questions betraying a desperate search for solutions. Within the company, his behavior underwent a significant transformation. Team meetings that had previously focused on maintaining existing processes now centered around discussions of innovation and growth. He began implementing some of the very strategies I had proposed during my tenure, though scaled-down versions that failed to capture their full potential. The irony was palpable. Initiatives that had been dismissed as too ambitious now resurfaced as official company policies, albeit watered-down versions that lacked the comprehensive vision I had originally presented. His attempts to rectify the situation became more direct as time passed. Through mutual connections, he began reaching out to former colleagues, probing for information about my current projects and future plans. These inquiries were carefully couched as casual curiosity, but those familiar with the situation recognized them for what they were: tentative steps toward reconciliation. He even attended networking events where he knew I would be present, positioning himself strategically but never crossing the invisible boundary that separated us. The company's internal communications subtly shifted to reflect his growing awareness of the mistake. Monthly newsletters began featuring articles about the importance of embracing innovation and supporting ambitious employees. Training programs emphasized the value of forward-thinking approaches, though these initiatives often felt hollow without genuine cultural change to support them. His speeches at company gatherings took on a new tone, acknowledging the need for evolution while still struggling to fully embrace the changes required. Most telling was his reaction to industry developments that drew inspiration from my work. When competitors successfully implemented strategies similar to those I had proposed, he would spend hours analyzing their success, dissecting reports, and commissioning studies to understand why their approaches worked. His office became cluttered with whiteboards covered in notes comparing these successes to the stagnation his own company experienced. The contrast must have been particularly painful, watching others capitalize on ideas that had originated within his organization but had been rejected due to his own decisions. These changes in his behavior created a peculiar dynamic within the industry. While his actions demonstrated growing recognition of his mistake, they also highlighted the limitations of attempting to embrace innovation without addressing the fundamental cultural issues that had led to my dismissal. His efforts, though sincere, often came across as reactive rather than proactive, revealing the deep-seated challenges of shifting organizational paradigms without confronting the underlying fears and biases that had initially stifled ambition. The intersection of our paths became inevitable as industry events increasingly featured discussions about workplace evolution and innovation management. At a major marketing summit, I found myself delivering a keynote speech while noticing my former boss sitting conspicuously in the front row, his notebook open and pen poised. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me as I presented findings from research that had grown out of my personal experience, data showing how organizations that embraced ambition consistently outperformed those that suppressed it. During networking breaks, I observed him engaging with other attendees, referencing points from my presentation and incorporating them into his conversations about organizational change. His body language spoke volumes, the slight lean forward when discussing innovation strategies, the careful nodding when others praised my work, the thoughtful pauses before responding to questions about talent management. These subtle cues suggested a man grappling with the consequences of his past decisions, while simultaneously trying to position himself as part of the solution. Our paths crossed more frequently at industry panels and roundtable discussions. I noticed how he strategically positioned himself near groups discussing progressive workplace practices, contributing insights that sounded remarkably similar to arguments I had made during my tenure. His contributions, while valuable, often lacked the authenticity of lived experience, revealing the gap between theoretical understanding and practical implementation. Other panelists occasionally referenced my work, prompting him to add his perspective, though his comments typically trailed off as if he were holding back deeper thoughts. The professional community began recognizing the pattern of his attendance at events where my influence was strongest. Colleagues would approach me after sessions, commenting on how his presence seemed tied to discussions about ambition and innovation. Some interpreted his behavior as professional stalking, while others viewed it as a belated attempt at redemption. Regardless of interpretation, his actions created an interesting dynamic within the industry, a living case study of how leaders respond when confronted with the tangible results of their mistakes. At larger conferences, our proximity often led to indirect interactions. During Q&A sessions, he would ask questions that seemed designed to demonstrate his new understanding, while simultaneously testing the waters for potential reconciliation. His queries about implementing innovative strategies or supporting ambitious employees carried an undertone of personal reflection, suggesting that his journey toward recognizing the error of his ways was progressing, albeit slowly and publicly. This dance of professional proximity created a unique situation where our individual trajectories remained intertwined despite my departure from the company. Industry publications began noting the phenomenon, with some journalists speculating about the possibility of reconciliation or collaboration. Professional networks buzzed with theories about whether his persistent presence at these events indicated a genuine desire to learn or simply an attempt to stay relevant in an industry increasingly shaped by principles I had championed. The situation reached a critical point when a major industry publication approached me for an exclusive interview about the evolution of workplace culture. As I prepared my responses, I realized that my former boss's presence at these events had become an integral part of the narrative. His actions, whether intentional or not, had transformed from mere observation into active participation in the very conversations that challenged his previous stance on ambition and innovation. The industry watched with fascination as this drama unfolded, recognizing the broader implications for how organizations might approach similar situations in the future. As the weeks turned into months, the industry's response to my former boss's transformation evolved from cautious observation to active engagement. Colleagues and industry leaders began approaching me during conferences, sharing their perspectives on his journey toward redemption. Some viewed his attempts at change as genuine growth, while others remained skeptical, seeing them as calculated moves to repair his professional image. The complexity of his situation sparked numerous discussions about leadership accountability and the capacity for personal evolution in the corporate world. Professional networks buzzed with analysis of his behavior, with many pointing out the delicate balance he needed to maintain between acknowledging past mistakes and preserving his authority. Career coaches and organizational psychologists weighed in on the situation, using it as a case study in their workshops and seminars. The consensus was clear: his public reckoning had become a pivotal moment for the industry, highlighting the challenges of adapting traditional leadership models to accommodate modern workplace dynamics. Media coverage intensified as business publications began tracking the measurable impact of his changed approach on the company's performance. Data-driven analyses compared current metrics to those from my tenure, revealing both progress and persistent gaps. This scrutiny created a unique pressure that forced him to walk a fine line between implementing meaningful change and avoiding the appearance of merely following trends. The situation became a masterclass in leadership evolution, with industry watchers closely monitoring each decision he made. Among professional circles, the conversation expanded beyond individual accountability to examine systemic issues within corporate culture. My former boss's struggle to reconcile his past actions with current market demands served as a catalyst for broader discussions about how organizations could better support ambitious talent. Industry panels began dedicating segments to exploring these themes, often referencing his situation as a real-world example of the challenges and opportunities inherent in cultural transformation. The ripple effects of this ongoing drama reached beyond our immediate professional sphere, influencing how companies approached talent management and innovation strategies. Human resources departments began revisiting their policies regarding high-performing employees, while leadership training programs incorporated case studies based on the situation. The industry's collective examination of his journey reflected a deeper understanding that true organizational evolution required more than superficial changes. It demanded fundamental shifts in mindset and practice. Throughout these developments, the relationship between my former boss's transformation and my own professional evolution remained interconnected. Each step he took toward embracing progressive practices seemed to validate the very principles I had championed, while simultaneously highlighting the challenges of implementing such changes without first-hand experience. The industry's response to this complex dynamic underscored the broader implications of our shared history, transforming a personal narrative into a catalyst for meaningful change across multiple sectors. The intersection of our professional paths continued to evolve in unexpected ways, creating a web of connections that transcended our original conflict. Industry events became stages for parallel journeys, mine focused on building a new paradigm for workplace ambition, and his centered on demonstrating genuine transformation. Observers noted how our separate efforts often complemented each other, with my innovations in talent management systems providing practical solutions to the very challenges he publicly acknowledged needing to address. This dynamic relationship extended beyond formal settings into informal industry networks. Mutual colleagues reported instances where he referenced my work during internal strategy sessions, framing it as essential reading for understanding modern workplace dynamics. Meanwhile, I found myself incorporating anonymous case studies based on his company's experiences into my presentations, creating a feedback loop where theory and practice continually informed each other. The industry's response to this unspoken collaboration was one of cautious optimism, recognizing the potential for meaningful change emerging from what had initially appeared to be irreconcilable differences. Professional development programs began incorporating our parallel narratives into their curriculum, using the situation as a teaching tool for aspiring leaders. Business schools invited both of us to contribute to case studies and guest lectures, though scheduling conflicts often prevented direct interaction. This academic interest validated the broader significance of our shared experience, transforming it from a personal drama into a valuable learning opportunity for future generations of professionals. The media's coverage of our evolving relationship within the industry shifted from sensationalism to serious analysis. Thought leaders and organizational psychologists examined how our separate but interconnected journeys illustrated broader themes of leadership evolution, personal growth, and systemic change. Articles explored how our experiences might inform better practices for handling similar situations in other organizations, while podcasts featured discussions about the delicate balance between maintaining professional boundaries and facilitating meaningful industry progress. As time passed, the initial shock of my dismissal transformed into a powerful narrative about resilience and innovation. Industry conferences now regularly featured panels discussing the aftermath of our situation, with participants drawing lessons about how organizations can better support ambitious talent while maintaining operational stability. My former boss's continued presence at these events, combined with his evident efforts to implement change, created a unique environment where theory and practice converged in real time. The situation had evolved beyond our individual experiences, becoming a touchstone for discussions about workplace evolution across multiple sectors. Professional networks actively sought insights from those who had observed our parallel journeys, recognizing the value of learning from both success and failure in leadership development. The industry's response had shifted from mere observation to active participation in shaping how organizations approached talent management and innovation cultivation in the modern business landscape. Through this complex interplay of professional development and industry transformation, our shared history had become more than just a cautionary tale or redemption story. It had evolved into a living case study of how personal experiences could drive meaningful change across an entire sector. The ongoing dialogue between our separate but interconnected paths continued to shape industry conversations about ambition, innovation, and leadership evolution, creating a legacy that extended far beyond our original conflict.